Hi, this is Lynn McCool. Welcome to part 2 of the classical model of arrangement. So as you may recall, we were discussing the rhetorical modes. These are our methods of organizing and analyzing content within the body of the speech itself. We just finished talking about exemplification, or the use of examples as one way to advance an argument. Now let's turn our attention to a rhetorical mode known as definition. Defining a term is often the first step in a debate or disagreement. And of course, with today's polarized kind of cultural climate, it's very important to define terms. Definitions are often used to clarify terms and ideas, and actually there are several different methods of defining a term, and those methods can include some of the following. I'm going to show you these methods by way of example. I'll take the word faith and show you how you might define that term in a number of ways. The most obvious way to define a term, of course, is its lexical or dictionary definition. So, for example, faith's primary definition from the dictionary is confidence or trust in a person or thing, and you can see that there's even a way that it's used in a phrase here, so faith in another's ability. We might also, though, consider defining this word by its synonyms. So we could use words with similar meanings, such as belief, trust, confidence, or reliance. We could also define the term by what it is not, or its antonyms, so words with opposite meanings, such as faith is not faithlessness, or faith is not unbelief, or faith is not doubt or mistrust. We might use closely related terms to define faith, such as hope or a philosophy of life. And we can also use examples to define what faith is. So we might say martyrs are commonly known for their faith, or people have faith when they feel passionate about a cause, so they may have a strong faith in something they can't prove. So that's the use of examples in order to define the term. We can also use associated meanings. So we might say that faith is like a fervency of belief or some sort of religious or deeply held conviction. We can also give extended definitions of the term. So, for example, we could give the history of the term faith and its use, how it came into our language and how it was used. So, and you can see there that it comes from the Middle English, which had derived the word from Anglo-French, which had its roots in Latin. And then we can even see with the Latin root there that the word fidere used to mean to trust, and that this word actually, its documented entry into our language was, its first known use was the 13th century. We can also use analogies and comparisons to try to define a term. So we might say, well, faith is compared to a mustard seed. And of course, this is the famous comparison or analogy that Christ makes to his disciples, and trying to explain the concept of faith to them. So he compares it to something they would have known well, which was the little, very tiny mustard seed grain. And of course, you know the classic message there that if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed and you say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move and nothing will be impossible for you. So there are many different ways that you might define a term, and my recommendation is that you use a combination of these ways. So oftentimes we'll start with the lexical or dictionary definition of the term, but then we'll augment that particular definition with other ways of defining the term in order to help the audience understand and see how that particular word is being used and understood in a larger cultural sense. Okay, another rhetorical mode that you might consider using in your speech is something called classification and division. Classification organizes information into groups and categories. And this is really useful, especially if you have, let's say, a large concept that could be broken apart into its various components. And an effective classification always begins, interestingly enough, with a definition of the subject. So again, definition is an important part of rhetorical analysis and helping the audience understand and see what it is that you're trying to bring to them. And so we would begin by defining the subject and then dividing that into major categories based upon some common trait. After we had formed our categories, then we would want to arrange them in some kind of sequence that shows that the division does three things. First of all, that they are divided consistently. In other words, the same principles being used to classify each category, that they're complete, no major categories are omitted, and that they're significant, that the categories and subcategories are arranged in an order that demonstrates some purpose or some end in mind. And classification, like comparison, which we'll talk about here in a minute, builds your reader's expectation for precision, balance, and order. And that's really, really important, especially in public speaking, because unlike a text in which a reader could go back and review over something that has just been read, with public speaking, the audience typically only gets to hear the speech once. And so the more structure that we can build in organizationally, the better the chances are that the audience will understand our message and have a clear picture of what it is, the different points that we're bringing in and how they're connected, and how we're trying to move the listener along in our logical chain. Classification and division can be used to call your reader's attention to the principle that you've used to classify each category, or you could simply imply that and devote approximately the same amount of space to each category that you create. So that's also important. You don't want one category to be more heavily weighted than another. Okay, the next rhetorical mode is comparison contrast. This is a very common pattern of development. You probably have numerous times been asked to compare contrast something for other kinds of academic work. Compare contrast juxtaposes two things to highlight their similarities and differences, and it's often used to analyze information carefully. Comparison contrast works well because it often reveals insights into the nature of the information being analyzed. And again, you may have been asked to do this on a number of occasions, whether it's for exams or for papers that you've had to write, where you've had to discuss those subtle differences or those similarities in the method, the style, or the purpose of, let's say, two speeches or two texts, or any two items that you're looking at. Okay, here's an example of comparison contrast. So this is comparing and contrasting European football with American football, and if you take time to read over this description here, some of the things that you'll find is that within that paragraph, it emphasizes the physical details. In other words, what kind of ball is used in both aspects of each game. It talks about the behavior of the players. In other words, how much contact do the players have? Kind of a contact sport is soccer versus, or American football versus European football, and so forth. All right, the next mode of arrangement is cause and effect, and analyzing the causes that lead to a certain effect, or conversely, the effects that result from a cause, can be a very powerful foundation for an argument. Causal analysis depends upon crystal clear logic, and I'll just insert right here that it's important to carefully trace a chain of cause and effect and to recognize the possible contributing causes, and to avoid jumping to conclusions, because this is how we create false causal chains, and we don't want to do that because that is actually a fallacy in argumentation. And my most famous example of the false causal chain is the DirecTV commercial. that is rather humorous, but it does a great job of illustrating what happens when you make false connections between a series of events. So if you aren't familiar with that commercial, or if you are, remember that here's a guy and he decides to choose cable over DirecTV, and of course by the end of the commercial something terrible has happened to him. He's either beat up and lying in a ditch somewhere, or he has a grandchild that's wearing a studded dog collar, various humorous things that they portray at the end of the commercial to try to suggest that, going with DirecTV is going to be a much better experience than, let's say, going with cable. But in real argumentation, we actually don't want to make those kinds of connections. We actually do want to create connections that are valid and that actually do show a cause-effect relationship. Cause and effect is often signaled by the question or the word why in the title, or perhaps even in the opening paragraph. So why were the countries of France and Germany embroiled in the World War I conflict? Okay, so that would cause us to then take a look and see what the cause and effect chain was that happened with that particular war. So the first cause that you spot is not necessarily the only one or even the most important one, and that's where careful analysis is important for you to make sure that you are looking at all of the possible causes, because there may be other causes that may have other effects than the one that you've linked with this particular one, so you want to look at everything very carefully. Distinguish among different kinds of causes, because immediate causes come right before an effect, but if you are looking at underlying causes, those might be far removed from the effect and therefore may not be as readily apparent. So again, you have to do careful research there. Some causes are part of a cause-effect chain. In other words, you have a cause, it's kind of like a domino effect, I guess. You have a cause which then creates an effect, which then becomes the cause of another reaction, which then becomes an effect, and so forth. So again, you want to be careful that you don't construct faulty cause and effect chains, but ones that are actually valid.